Okay, this is Freeze Cracked, and I'm back, and I'm here to talk now about, I talked a little bit about safety in the last video, so I'm not going to talk about it again, but go watch that one. I'm going to talk about tools, and I'm not that organized, and I don't really have a huge strong motivation on these videos I'm doing to do anything other than try and be helpful with a little bit of teaching or education about stuff. So you'll just have to try and hang with me and forgive me for not being super organized with stuff, just the way I am. And you know, I want to make sure I get the stuff done and get the information out, because if I don't, then it doesn't get out, and that's the goal. One of the things that, different nappers, they all have buckets and stuff, or bags or whatever ways that they transport their tools and that they keep their tools. What I have chosen to do up to this point is I got a 5-gallon bucket here, and I bought a cover that is also a seat that rotates, and I bought it at a local Lowe's or Home Depot or something. And then I bought some inserts that are sectioned that fit down in the bucket and stack on top, nest on top of each other. And I've got more of them than just these two, but I tend to just have these two when I'm here at home. And I tend to have my abo tools and my copper tools in different things here, and I always have both with me because I use all kinds of different stuff. And by the way, I'll stop for a second and say there's different kinds of napping. So when you start out, if you start looking online, you see people's pictures, and they say, oh yeah, I napped this. Well, the first question to ask yourself is, well, how did you nap it? Because if you're new and you're trying to get to where you can make stuff, and you're doing your little initial efforts, and your stuff looks horrible, and you see other people's stuff looks absolutely gorgeous, well, first of all, they're not using the same rock as you, and they may have perfect rock and you've got bad rock. But another thing is too, some people have an incredible artist eye, and some people have incredible motor skills. So they could have been a pro tennis player, or they could have been a pro artist, and when you put that together, they become pro nappers. And it's almost impossible to compete with people like that unless you're similarly gifted. And so you do what you can do. But then the other factor is they may have used a bunch of power tools and machines and stuff to crank out what they did, and then taken one final little series of flakes over it. So if you want to do that kind of lapidary type or what's called fog, flake over grind type napping, then it's a different process than what I'm showing, because I don't do that, and that's not what I have here. So there's different kinds of napping. But anyway, abo is aboriginal, and what that means is you try and use the tools that would have been available to and probably used by people a long time ago, and hopefully similar techniques, although they didn't write a bunch of books about how they did stuff. And then copper is I guess you could call it cheating, but I call it arm saving. Copper is using modern materials that tend to have a performance advantage at times, although the abo guys are going to come after me now for saying that. And I'm an abo guy too, I'm just not a full-fledged one. So anyway, back on the subject, tools. There's basically two kinds of regular napping, and that's where you hit stuff and then where you push on stuff. And the hitting stuff is called percussion work, and the pushing on stuff is called pressure work. So you got tools for both. And then you have tools for preparing things to be hit or pushed on, and a lot of times that's things like abraders. When you have a knife edge, it crushes when you try and do anything with it, so you can't work off of knife edges. So you have abraders and things that you tend to smooth or stiffen or get the sharp edges off of stuff before you do more work with it, etc. So anyway, I'm going to talk about some of that kind of stuff. Okay, first of all, I'll just show you this, and I'm drawing a mental blank, and it makes me mad, but this is called a spalling hammer, but there's another term for it. It was named after, I guess, the person that originally did it. I can't remember what it is. I'm just drawing a mental blank. But anyway, the cool thing about it is it's copper, it's heavy, it's like 5 pounds, and it turns in this steel handle. And basically, when you go out in the field and you're knocking off big old huge spalls to take back home and gleefully making the perfect points, this is the kind of thing some people use. The reason copper is an advantage is steel is too hard, and some people do use mild steel, steel that has not been hardened, that's annealed so that it's softer, and that does work, and people do use it. But copper is even a little bit softer than that, and what the advantage there is, it grabs your platform and knocks off what you want, but it also doesn't shatter. So that's why you'll see people using a lot of copper and not much of anything else. It's grabby, and it deforms just enough to where it doesn't shatter stuff. But anyway, there's several guys that sell these. I got this from Mark Bracken out of flintknappingtools.com, but there's other people that sell them too. And you wouldn't find it in a store. I mean, these are kind of a custom tool for flint knappers. So then you have the stuff you hit with, and it falls out like this. A lot of people like to use, I'll show you a new one. This is a new one. A lot of people like to use lead-filled copper boppers. They're called boppers. The reason is because it has this handle and the weight is at the front, so it's front weighted, and allows you to kind of throw the thing, or it really helps a lot with the swing, and it cuts down on the problems to your wrist and stuff like that. And the deformation of it when it hits is just perfect for ripping off some pretty cool flakes, and the bigger boppers, you know, some pretty big flakes. So that's, I guess, probably the most popular thing for flint knapping, is to do the direct percussion work with this kind of thing. There are different sizes of these, and they go from really pretty little. I don't have a tiny one here. Well, yeah, I do. They go from small, about like that, to the biggest one. Where's my biggest one? I'll get a used one. Here's my biggest one. And there are actually people that use bigger ones, but you can see, you know, how chewed up and deformed it's become, and really this probably should have been retired. One of the things I do though, as it gets dinged up and eaten into, is I've got a little tool, a little hammer I always keep with me, just a little cheap hammer. What I do is I just redress it and reshape it a little bit and knock down all those little flat areas. You can't file these things because the copper is not that thick, and if you file it, you'll end up getting through it, and then it's basically ruined. Some people do heat these things up and pull off the cap and get another cap and replace it, you know, melt the lead and pour it back into the other cap, epoxy it back on, and reuse the handles and stuff. And the places where you get this kind of stuff do sometimes sell just the caps. These are basically the similar though, if you went to the plumbing supply and got you those square-ended plumbing caps and then put a ball bearing or a punch or something in them and domed it out from hitting it from the inside, it is more or less what they do. But they actually have presses that they do that with, and you can buy the caps, and they'll sell you the dies for the presses too if you want to make your own. Not everybody's are made the same, I can tell you that. I've used them made from different people, I've made them myself, and some people's are much more durable and lasting than others. So anyway, so those are the boppers. A set of boppers, you know, depending upon how you abuse it or use it, you know, may last you a year or so, depending upon how much you nab too, but it's a good investment. So then there's people that don't want to use the lead-filled boppers, and one of the reasons some people don't want to use it is partially because some of the best experts in the country use solid copper, and so they use as solids. It's nothing but a copper rod that gets rounded on the end. Well, these are harder than the lead-filled boppers, so it'll take a flake where the lead-filled bopper won't even take a flake sometimes, and since they're very dense and heavy, it'll make the flakes go farther sometimes, but since it's harder, it also delivers a little bit more of a shattering effect, and it requires that the user be more have a greater degree of expertise, basically. So there's not really that much similarity between using the two different types of tools. So if you want to make sure that you take big old long flakes all the time and everything like that, you can try this stuff and see what you think. And they don't wear out. I mean, you know, this probably lasts you a lifetime of napping, even if you're dressing it. But it's not as preferred, although there are some people that are just masterful with solid copper. This is kind of an interesting homemade twist between the two. What someone did here is, it's a copper piece of tubing, it's a copper cap, and they melted and filled it with lead to about there. So it's much heavier than a standard bopper, and it's shorter. And the way that I use this is, instead of grabbing the handle like this, I put it in my hand like this and punch at the surface to take the flake. And that's the way a lot of people use the solid stuff too, on the smaller ones anyway. And it's really effective. I mean, it makes the flakes run pretty well. So I can't knock this tool. This is a pretty good little tool. I don't use them as much because I rely more on my support underneath and my technique to get the flakes that I want, and I try to use the same kind of tools most of the time to cut down on the variability of using different tools. Okay, so where am I at? I'm at 11 minutes. All right, here's another example of a solid head bopper. I said another example. This is the first one I'm showing you. This is a solid head. The handle is a plastic like Delrin or something, and it's got like a copper ball, and it's got a threaded bolt through here that goes up into the copper ball and holds it. So it's solid. It's not going to really wear out very fast at all. It is front weighted, and if you want to try something that's somewhat of a compromise between a solid copper rod and a bopper, you might consider testing out some of this kind of stuff. Flintknapping Tools also sells these though in a different configuration. And I've got 4 different sizes here I can show you real quick. These are solid head, solid copper billets, and the handle is turned out of Delrin, I think. And they're heavy, and they're stout, and they're strong. And again, you're going to have a different effect if you use these in the lead-filled boppers, but you might buy one and try it. They sell them in sets, but they sell them individually too. One thing that I do is, in order to keep from wearing the boppers out, I'll take, there's something called turning an edge. And turning an edge is where, when you're working on a piece, sometimes you want to move your edge up or down. And so this edge is down a lot right here. So if I wanted to bring it up, and you know, not a subject for now when we're talking about tools, but if I wanted to bring it up, sometimes you want to turn the edge and you just want to kind of go along and knock, bevel down. Well, if you do that all the time with your lead-filled boppers, you're just going to wear a hole in the end of your bopper through the copper, and you ruin the bopper. So a lot of times I'll use the solids for doing that, and then use the boppers for the main hits. That's all I wanted to say about that. Okay, so what else here? On the copper tools, I'll talk about, okay, so I've talked about the percussion stuff. I do use a technique called indirect percussion, and basically I use a punch that I stick under my leg, and then I put the punch on the platform and hit it with a, I use a moose billet for that actually, but you can use different percussors to hit it. But it helps perfectly with accuracy. If you can't hit, then you can hit with this, you're never going to miss. So that technique, the indirect percussion, is taken, it's catching on. It's been publicized a fair amount by me and a few other, and other people. I came late to the party, but I've talked about it quite a bit, and it's very effective, so I use it. Anyway, so now I'll talk about abraders a little bit. There's different grits of abraders, everything from fine diamond up to really coarse silicon carbide type stuff. And they're sold commercially for nappers in little blocks that are very handy sizes. Here's an unused medium grit one. But some people just go get a you know, a 6-inch grinding wheel at the store and break it into like thirds and use it. I don't prefer that as much because it just doesn't fit my hand as well. I don't like it. Here's a fine grit that's pretty worn. But once you get them kind of worn, you know, you can save it and start a new one, but then you use this to get into little corners and areas that are tougher. But sometimes people will use different things. Like here's a wheel, like just a grindstone that is a different grit. So if you prefer a grit that's non-standard to the ones that you can buy from flintknapping supplies, you might look at that. Some people have, let me see what I've got in here, is little bitty abraders. There's little bitty round abraders. There's little bitty stick abraders. And then, I shouldn't even show you this because everybody's gonna be going, oh yeah, you cheat, you cheat. Anyway, here's a little bitty diamond file. And I've only got one of those in here, but it really can get into little areas and do things that nothing else can do. I've got some little bitty things I never really hardly use, little bitty stick abraders. But another thing that I use a fair amount of the time for abrading is some of my abo hammerstones. A quartzite is a really cool abrader. When you're trying to do a fine edge and you don't want to turn it much, and you want it stiffened, you can just sit there and you almost can go along and polish it with fine abraders like this. And sometimes, man, these little hammerstones and stuff are really great for doing some pretty fine abrading. So anyway, that's basics of abrading. Abrading is critically important, far more so than a lot of knappers realize. It's how you make your platforms sometimes. It's how you move them up. It's how you move them down. You can move them sideways. You can shape them. You can bevel them. Now you do some of that stuff with flakers too, with pressure work, but abrading is really important for it. Okay, I'm at 16 minutes, so I gotta shut up and start a new one. So we're gonna come back with more on tools.